Annie stood in this zombie siege that was like hell on earth, her heart filled with despair and anger. Just now, Annie and Johnson were on the road to divorce. She thought she could start over by getting rid of this broken marriage, but she didn't expect that fate would play such a cruel joke on her. When the zombies came like a tide, Annie was pushed out by Johnson's vicious lover Sophia, and her sharp teeth bit Annie fiercely. At that moment, the piercing pain almost made me faint. When Annie regained consciousness, she found the three of them hiding in a room. The young lover Sophia looked terrified and said in a trembling voice, "I heard that it only takes a dozen days for zombies to mutate. She will definitely mutate before we rescue her. Let's push her out." Johnson, the man who once slept with Annie, took out a chain without hesitation, tied her hands tightly, and said indifferently, "The divorce is not final yet. I believe in seeing things through to the end." On the brink of life and death, their ugly faces were fully exposed. But they don't know that this is just the beginning. What awaits them next will be the storm after Annie's Jedi counterattack. How can I find a glimmer of hope in this desperate situation? I stayed awake all night, with alarms blaring outside the window and the news reporting that an unknown virus was spreading rapidly. However, the next morning, Annie got up early, took all her documents, and went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The world can be destroyed, but her marriage with Johnson must end. Johnson, dressed elegantly, leaned against the car, and Sophia clung to him like a hen guarding her food. "You're late." The first time he saw her, he put out his cigarette, stood up, and said, "You're here too early." Annie took out her ID, her eyes cold. "Did you bring everything? I heard the zombies are coming. It might be too late to go back and get them." He sneered, "Don't worry. Even if I turn to a zombie, I will leave." As soon as he finished speaking, as if his prediction had come true, the zombies came faster and more urgently than he had imagined, although there were not many of them. As they were arguing, a zombie pounced towards them silently, and Sophia screamed and pushed Annie. A sharp pain came from her shoulder, and a layer of red mist suddenly covered her eyes. In the last scene, she saw Johnson picked up a fire extinguisher and smashed it hard at a zombie that was rushing towards Sophia. As if waking up from chaos, Annie opened her eyes and saw the familiar ceiling, her home. Before he could sort out his thoughts, he heard Sophia's dissatisfied voice. "Johnson, the news said that it only takes a dozen days for the zombies to mutate. If the rescue team can't get here, isn't it too dangerous to keep her at home? Anyway, you're going to get a divorce. What does it have to do with you whether she is dead or alive?" Annie turned her neck and felt a piercing pain in her shoulder, which made her hiss. Sophia took a step back in fear, grabbing the corner of her clothes nervously. "Johnson, she's awake. Throw her out." In front of the window, Johnson stood against the light, his snow-white shirt splattered with blood, and was tying a strip of cloth around the handle of a knife. Apparently, he had gone through a tough battle to get her and Sophia back from the Civil Affairs Bureau. But Annie doesn't understand why she should take the risk of bringing back a zombie that is destined to mutate. Seeing that she had woken up, Johnson's first words were to defend Sophia. Sophia was just too scared at the time. You don't have to blame her. Sophia seemed to have found someone to rely on and sneered confidently. "In this environment, you won't survive long without someone to protect you. I just help you get rid of it in advance." Annie was used to such provocations. She looked directly at Johnson and said coldly, "The day you chose is a bad one. It's really no good to have anything to do with you. Don't you have a feng shui master in your company? You can't even calculate something as big as a divorce." Although she couldn't see his expression clearly, Annie knew that his face must have turned dark. "Annie, if you weren't out fooling around with Ethan, would I have chosen today?" He said sarcastically, "You really do like younger boys. You accept all the younger ones, so why don't you think he's immature now?" Annie pouted. The angrier he got, the happier she was. "Young boys are so good. There are few good things in life. I have bad teeth and can't chew stubborn bones. I'm afraid you can't swallow it, and it will get stuck in your throat." Since when did they become unable to communicate calmly? Once they opened their mouths, they would start to argue with each other and would not stop until the other party was embarrassed. Sophia wanted to interrupt. "Johnson!" Annie and Johnson said in unison, "Shut up." Sophia's eyes suddenly turned red. She gently pulled Johnson's sleeve. The man's tone softened instantly. "I'm not angry with you." Annie turned her head away, not wanting to watch the scene anymore. "Did you find all the documents?" The tenderness in Johnson's eyes disappeared instantly, and he threw a bag in front of her. "Everything is here. Don't worry. It will be as you wish." It's really strange. It was he who proposed a divorce. Why is he angry? A month ago, he smashed things all over the floor, pointed at her nose, and yelled, "Annie, anyone who doesn't divorce is a dog." She was about to make a few more sarcastic remarks when the howling of ghosts and wolves from downstairs reminded them of their current situation. They live in a luxury apartment with a complete security system, facial recognition for entry and exit, and triple protection measures. But even so, there is no guarantee that they can survive for a month. What's more, the food at home is only enough to last for a week. Johnson turned back to the bedroom to look for a weapon. Sophia was on the verge of collapse. She grabbed a plate and threw it at Annie. The plate broke at her feet. Annie grinned, and Sophia staggered back in fear. Ah! Her scream attracted Johnson, who supported Sophia distressfully. After checking her wound, he looked at Annie coldly. "If you have any anger, come to me. Sophia is a coward." Annie sneered. "Don't worry. Once I mutate, none of you will be able to escape." Johnson's eyes darkened, and he seemed to want to say something, but he finally carried Sophia into the bedroom. Annie then hissed softly and pulled up her trouser leg, revealing a hideous wound, but the blood that flowed out was not red. As expected, she still couldn't escape the infection. "I heard that zombies can't feel heartache. If that's true, then Sophia did a good thing." After Johnson treated Sophia's wound, he took out an iron chain and squatted in front of Annie. Annie glanced at it and shook her head disapprovingly. "Can't you change it? This is Lucky's dog leash." After the words fell, both of them fell silent. Lucky was a stray dog they adopted together. It was smart, loyal, and had all the virtues a loyal dog should have. It witnessed their love and died the year they broke up. They once built a warm doghouse for it, but in the end, Annie was the only one who sent it away because its owner was lingering in some woman's bed at that time. It was an ordinary puppy, just like her, who was once the most insignificant existence in Johnson's brilliant life. It has a solitary grave, and she may not even have a grave. Johnson silently tied her hands and tied the other end to the pillar in the kitchen. "I don't know who I'm talking to. The divorce is not final yet. I always finish what I start." Sophia pouted and said, "It's good enough to give her food, Johnson. We don't have enough food. She won't appreciate it anyway, so why waste it?" "Miss Sophia, I advise you shut up. My teeth are itching now." Sophia didn't dare to speak anymore. Johnson put down the spoon. "These are all the things left in the refrigerator. In the cupboard, second row from the top." Suddenly, Annie remembered something and wanted to stop him, but it was too late. The man walked up to her with heavy steps, breathing slightly faster, and raised the box in his hand. "Didn't you say you had thrown it away?" Sophia approached curiously and accidentally knocked off the lid of the box, causing the contents to scatter all over the floor. It was a stack of B-ultrasound photos, small toys, amulets, and a gold lock. They rolled to Annie's feet, and she shuddered violently, as if she was burned, with a trace of pain in her eyes. Sophia wanted to look down, but Johnson pushed her away. She didn't dare to look either, but just stared at Annie with a gloomy look. "Why are you still keeping them? What's the point of keeping them?" "Shut up." Annie's eyes were red, veins popped out, and she lost her composure. "Pick them up for me." Sophia was frightened by her appearance and subconsciously bent down to pick it up. "Don't touch me," Johnson shouted in a low voice. "Johnson, you are not a human being." Annie struggled madly. Johnson said to Sophia, "Throw them away." "You dare." Annie kicked and kicked, trying to stop Sophia, but the latter still threw the things out of the window. She watched them fall down in a flurry, as if her heart was torn into pieces. Her eyes were filled with hatred, and she wanted to eat Johnson alive. Johnson didn't dare to look into her eyes. Of course he didn't, because he felt guilty. He was the one who destroyed this child. When Annie was 12 years old, she moved to the city with her family. One day, when she went to take out the trash, she saw 6-year-old Johnson squatting next to the trash can, confronting a stray dog for half a hamburger. She scared off the dog, took him home, and served him a plate of roast chicken. He raised his head. His face was stained, but with a hint of timid flattery. "Sister, I don't eat chicken skin. Can you help me pick it out?" His mother told her that Johnson's biological mother died when he was 1 year old, and his father remarried soon after. The arrival of his stepmother made his world even colder. In that family, he received only punches and insults. Young Annie was overwhelmed with maternal love and treated him as her own brother. She protected him as he grew up, helped him with his studies and homework, gave him food and clothes, and stood in front of him every time he was bullied by his stepmother. She really treated him as a relative. However, she forgot that men grow up. When he was young, he liked his sister because that was the support he lacked. But when he grew up, he loved his sister more because he needed admiration and dependence. He was willing to give up his wife, who was trapped in the office by the flood for the sake of a girl's brother, I'm afraid. Because the elder sister can do everything, while the younger sister needs to be cared for. When he earned his first pot of gold at the age of 26, he had his first sister. Annie couldn't tolerate any sand in her heart, and they had quarreled over it, and even filed for divorce. Later, he learned to conceal it, and she no longer knew how many sisters he had. Her bestie advised her that men are always greedy for novelty, and what marriage is free of impurities. As long as you control the money, you can control his heart. She shook her head. She didn't want the money. What she couldn't let go were the memories they had shared over the years. A year ago, Johnson finally lost control of his lover. At that time, she was already 6 months pregnant. The woman rushed to her with a look of disdain on her face. Why don't you get a divorce? Have you ever taken a picture of your wrinkles? Has he ever taken you to any formal occasions? You are his stain. Annie stroked her belly gently, feeling desolate in her heart, and smiled indifferently. I hope you can live to see the day when you have wrinkles. She told herself it didn't matter. She still had her children. These women came and went, but she was always the mistress of the house. Johnson was also looking forward to the arrival of the child. They prayed for amulets together, bought baby clothes and toys, and even picked a name in advance, Jack. As long as Jack is born, everything will be back to normal. But the woman suddenly sneered. What's the big deal about a child? I can have one too. You know what? Johnson also took me to ask for a talisman. She scattered the amulets and gold locks in the bag all over the floor. What's so special about this? I can have as many as he buys for me. She remembered that it was the other person who pushed her first. Then, she lost control and fell down the stairs. She fell to the ground and called Johnson, her voice trembling. Come back soon. Johnson came back and hugged the woman. She felt a warm liquid sliding down between her legs, and fear and despair made her unable to make a sound. She stretched out her hand to him weakly, but he held the woman and left without looking back. When she woke up, her once bulging belly was flat. Johnson sat down beside her bed and squeezed her hand so hard it nearly broke her bones. I'm sorry, Annie, I didn't see you. I thought you were being jealous again. He cried, but she just felt sick. He said, there will be more children. She shook her head, tears falling silently. No more. The doctor said she can only have this one child in this life. Jack was gone, killed by his father. She went crazy. After being discharged from the hospital, she destroyed all his things. She cursed him with the most vicious words, beat him, pushed him, and drove him out of the house. She tore up their wedding photos and burned all the group photos, setting their love and memories on fire. She stopped turning on the light and curled up in the corner day and night, holding Jack's belongings. Johnson came back every day, silently pulled her out, fed her, and apologized again and again. But she had already become a walking corpse. She enlarged the ultrasound photos and hung them in the living room. She filled the room with Jack's toys and longevity locks, and played his heartbeat 24 hours a day. A month later, Johnson collapsed. Annie, do you have a torturess like this? Jack is my child too, and I am in pain too. Have you ever dreamed about him? She asked with a smile. He said that he had grown little hands and feet. He asked me why his father didn't let him come into this world. Johnson covered his face and yelled, stop it. But she wouldn't stop. Finally, he ran away. After that, he indulged in the life of luxury, while she was trapped in the abyss of memories. Until the zombies came. Their grievances had to be put aside temporarily. Johnson tightened his grip on his weapon in silence. Sophia suddenly turned to look at her, her eyes flickering. Johnson, push her out. Sophia was overjoyed and ran over excitedly to untie Annie's chain. After untying it, she signaled Johnson to lift Annie up while she went to open the door. Johnson was very strong and lifted Annie up with just one hand. She was already unsteady. Her body swayed and finally fell into his arms. His body stiffened instantly, and his breathing became slightly disordered. Annie laughed softly, but uttered cold and piercing words, feeding your ex-wife to zombies, killing your wife and children. Johnson, you are really great. His grip suddenly tightened, and Annie frowned in pain, looking up at him. Johnson, do you think my life would have been much happier if I hadn't brought you home? Without waiting for his answer, she continued, of course. Any man is thousands of times better than you. Her teeth began to itch, and the roar outside the door was like a death horn, making the blood in her body gradually boil. Johnson remained silent, but in the end, he still pushed her to the door. "Johnson, when I count to 3, you push her out," Sophia said hurriedly. 3, 2. Annie closed her eyes, and the sound of Jack's soft heartbeat emerged in her mind. "Jack, Mom is here to see you." 1. Sophia opened the door suddenly, and 6 or 7 zombies rushed into the house. In a flash, Johnson pushed Annie back suddenly, then raised his foot and kicked Sophia out with a bang, then quickly slammed the door and locked it. A shrill scream exploded outside the door. Sophia's voice was filled with despair and pain. "Johnson, you are not a human. You are a devil. I'll help." Annie was stunned. Johnson bent down to pick up the chain and tied her hands again. Without looking in her eyes, he said in a deep voice, "The living room is not safe anymore. We have to move to the storage room." He helped her to the storage room, resettled her, and then walked out. Annie watched him push the piano, dining table, and refrigerator to the door, then fetch a few knives from the kitchen. Finally, he moved all the edible food into the storage room, closed the door, and locked it. It gradually became quiet outside the door. Just like Sophia said, they were full and would not move again for a while. Johnson seemed to want to say something to her, but when he raised his eyes to meet her sarcastic gaze, he paused, a familiar sneer flashing in his eyes. If it were Ethan, you would definitely be reluctant. Annie ignored him. He was bored and ended up sitting next to her. The storage room was not big, and with the food and daily necessities, they had to sit together. How long had it been since they had been so close together? Perhaps because it was too quiet. Johnson played with the knife in his hand and asked casually, "Does it hurt?" Annie said coldly, "Let me take a bite, then you will know." "Annie, it seems like we haven't been together so peacefully for a long time." He tried to find some topics. She ignored him, and the atmosphere fell into silence again. After an unknown amount of time, Annie suddenly spoke. "Johnson, have you ever had a nightmare?" His body stiffened, and the stiffness spread from his fingertips to his entire body. She smiled. "I will. I haven't been able to sleep well for half a year. Whenever I can't sleep, I get up and watch the news and read about your scandals. You took them to buy yachts, set off fireworks, and attended cocktail parties together. At that time, I was wondering, why was I the only one suffering? Isn't Jack your child?" "Annie, that's enough." She raised her head, her eyes dry. The tears of the past 6 months had dried up. "You were so happy, like a bird that has escaped from a cage. It turns out that it was Jack and I who trapped you." Her voice trembled slightly, but was unusually calm. "Then what am I?" I was unwilling to accept it. When I cried until my heart ached, and Jack cried in his dream for his father. How could you be so peaceful and indulge in the land of beauty? Her calmness made his voice begin to tremble. "Annie, please, don't say any more." She turned her head to look at him, her eyes calm. "Do you know what's behind you?" He was stunned and turned his head slowly. There were the baby carriage, small clothes, milk bottles, educational toys, and the baby hair memorial board that he had prepared for Jack. His pupils suddenly contracted, and he stood up abruptly, gasping violently. Annie smiled, feeling extremely happy. "This is his paradise, and also our grave." Johnson stumbled and slowly collapsed against the door. "That's right, Johnson, you should be in pain too." He stared at those things with lifeless eyes. His face turned pale instantly, and he suddenly growled and covered his eyes with his hands. The voice was choked with pain. "Annie, I said I'm sorry. I'm sad too. I also have nightmares. I suffer the same pain." Annie laughed. Her laugh was extremely sarcastic. "Are you sad enough to take a woman on vacation?" The second month after Jack left, Johnson took a woman on vacation to the Arctic. She saw the aurora for the first time in their photo. His wife cried all night, but he embraced and kissed another woman under the world's aurora. Then he said he was very sad. She hated that she mutated too slowly and couldn't bite him to death. "Because I'm afraid of you." He put his hand down, his eyes filled with deep sadness. "I'm scared every time I see you. I know I've messed up everything. We can't go back. You're crazy, hanging those pictures all over the living room. Have you ever thought about how I feel when I come back every day and see them? You always ask me if I've seen Jack, and you say he's still at home. Don't I feel pain? But you keep reminding me that I killed him. I feel like I'm being tortured every day. I feel like I'm going crazy. I'm very depressed. I want to escape. Listen, men's excuses are always so fresh. When he cheated, he said it was just a novelty, but he still loved her. When he couldn't face it, he still went to find a woman. He said that she made him depressed and he wanted to escape. But what about her? She wanted to say something else, but suddenly there was a loud bang and the door collapsed. The zombies rushed in. The next second, Johnson pounced on her and held her tightly in his arms. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Zombies were growling outside the door, and the sounds of destruction were coming one after another. She heard his heartbeat as rapid as thunder. It turned out that he was also afraid. A piercing pain came over her, and Annie curled up in pain, as if her limbs were about to break apart. She couldn't help but growl, but the sound that came out was the roar of a zombie. She knew that she was about to mutate. Johnson hugged her tightly and comforted her again and again. Sister, I'm here, don't cry, I'm here. She didn't cry. When she was 13, she broke her leg and cried in pain, which frightened him. Since then, she told herself not to cry and to be his support. He was the one crying. Johnson's tears fell on her face and slid down the corners of her eyes, as if he was crying for her. Her consciousness gradually became blurred, and there was a primitive impulse in her body that was about to break free from its restraints. She passed out. In a daze, she heard the phone ringing, and Johnson held her in his arms for a long time before answering the call. Annie, where are you? The whole city has fallen, and the higher-ups are organizing an evacuation. Are there any survivors around you? Johnson's voice was low. She's with me. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Ethan's voice came. Johnson, it's me. Please tell Annie that the rescue team is on the way, and ask her to wait a little longer. By the way, although our treatment has been suspended, please remind her not to forget to take her medicine and never stop taking it without permission. What did you say? Johnson's chest shook Annie's ears so hard that they hurt. What medicine? What treatment? You don't know. Ethan's voice was full of disbelief. She has severe anxiety and moderate depression. She has been receiving treatment for the past 6 months. Her condition keeps recurring. I advised her to go out and relax. Stay away from sources of stimulation. She is so ill, and you're only concerned with your own healing? If it weren't for me, she would have collapsed long ago. The phone was hung up at some point. Annie was no longer conscious. Johnson held her tightly, whispering, I'm sorry. His tears wet her hair, making her feel uncomfortable. She wanted to push him away, but she didn't have the strength. She wanted to scold him, but when she opened her mouth, only a low roar came out. He hugged her tighter, crying like a child who couldn't find his home. Sister, please don't abandon me. I was wrong. Can we go back to the past? I don't want money. I just want you. Sister. She opened her eyes, her gaze dull and empty. Something was rapidly draining away from her brain, and the memories before her flashed by like a revolving lantern. Johnson at the age of 6, 7, 8, all the way to 32. Those memories drifted away like catkins. As the man shouted at the top of his lungs, she slowly met his eyes. Then, a hoarse roar came from deep in her throat. She was changing faster than she had expected. Her nails became sharp, her blood vessels bulged, her hair fell out in clumps, her eyes bulged, and her teeth became sharp. Her mind was blank. She only knew that she wanted to go out to hunt to get blood. However, she was trapped in this small space by a man. He tied her here and talked to her every day. Sister, try it. This is fresh steak. Maybe you will like it. Sister, don't move. The wound on your hand has split open. Sister, I really don't want to get a divorce. I didn't bring my ID card that day, so there's no way we can get a divorce. I just wanted to piss you off. Sister, look, I found a photo of us when we were kids. Sister, do you want to eat their meat? I can help you catch them. Sister, look at me. Look at me. My name is Johnson. I'm her husband, your lover. She just felt that he was annoying. She struggled and wanted to bite him. She couldn't resist his scent, but he just shook his head sadly. Sister, I can't die now. I have to wait for the rescue team. They have the antidote. Please wait. I will accompany you. She bared her teeth in anger and kicked him, but he didn't leave even though he was hurt and just looked at her tenderly. Sister, I dreamed about Jack last night. Now, let me bear this pain for you. But she didn't understand why he would take the risk of leaving behind a zombie that was about to mutate. But he didn't leave. Sister, it's been 15 days. The antidote should be here soon. He cut a hole next to the wound on his leg that had not yet healed, squeezed out a bowl of blood, and brought it to her lips. Wait a little longer, we will find a way. Day after day, and then another day. She had no concept of time. She only knew that she was very hungry, very hungry. Every time she screamed with hunger, he would cover her mouth and say, Don't attract them. They will kill you. One day, she heard cheers coming from downstairs. The rescue team is here. The rescue team is here. We are saved. The man in front of her suddenly became excited. He ran out, and soon after, he ran back with a happy face. Sister, the rescue team is here. The antidote must have arrived too. He paced back and forth excitedly, then picked up a cell phone and made a call. After a moment, the phone slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. He staggered and knelt in front of her. There is no antidote. They didn't even develop an antidote. They just killed all the mutants. He suddenly covered his face, burst into tears, and hunched over. I can't save you. Why? I have money, but I still can't save you. He cried for a long time, so long that it was dark outside. A cold voice came from downstairs. Check it carefully. Not a single zombie can be left. It must be cleaned up. He slowly raised his head. Annie saw that he had a strange smile on his face. He closed the door of the storage room again and locked it. Then he walked in front of her and gently stroked her face. Annie, sister, you must have been starving these days. She smelled the scent of blood close at hand. The skin was so close as long as she opened her mouth. She screamed, and the chains made a harsh sound. He looked down at her with a determined look. He untied the chains that bound her. Then, smiling, he opened his arms and hugged her.